It's time for me to make a video again. I'm busy working on Silver Sky's 1996 version, and I've reconciled myself to the fact that if it was published by a professional, mainstream publisher like Bantam or Tor Books or whatever, it would be classified probably as a fantasy. I actually don't enjoy fantasies. I'm not a science fiction or fantasy fan, so when I first started writing this book, I rebelled against the idea of it being a fantasy. My favorite books that I've enjoyed reading over time, I love Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I love Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. These are my favorite books. I enjoy reading these books. I didn't really like Gone with the Wind because I just couldn't get into Scarlett O'Hara. Scarlett O'Hara reminded me too much of Laurie McBride, so I've never really cared for Gone with the Wind. I loved The Thornbirds I noticed that my favorite books usually have a character who is abused or treated unfairly, and the resolution of the novel revolves around the fact that she gets what she deserves. She doesn't deserve the abuse. So like in The Thornbirds, Meggie was neglected, and she ended up perpetuating the disorder. The Thornbirds is an event story, a story about a disorder, and the disorder was they all sacrificed something that was worthy for something that wasn't worth it, like ambition or something. True love was sacrificed in the Thornbirds for something else inferior. In the case of Ralph de Bricassar, he sacrificed true love for ambition. Meggie sacrificed, I would say Meggie sacrificed true love for her children to have a sort of a love affair with one of her children that took the place of Ralph de Bricassar, and that was a disorder because Justine got neglected. And so the Thornbirds novel ended when the disorder was fixed, when Justine ended up marrying the man she loved, and when she quit sacrifice. She was going to be another sacrifice. See, everybody in that novel, the Thornbirds, was a sacrifice for something that wasn't worth sacrificing over, and that was the disorder that had to be fixed. So it was an event story. Then you have the character story where you have a character who's not happy with their role in life. It's all about the character and the world they live in and how they've got to change their role to be happy. And that's my story, Silver Skies. And my main character, Dorben Abakuk, is stuck in a marriage to an abusive spouse who's cold, and he didn't marry the woman he loved. This is part of the backstory because he wanted to be accepted in his community, which was something that was very important to him. So there's a bit of a disorder going on there too. The disorder is that the community is mentally ill. So I've got a mentally ill world that Dor is surrounded by, that he's trying to pacify, while at the same time, this mentally ill world has destroyed his love life. He's in a cold marriage. He thought he could pacify this world and have a good marriage, and it just didn't work out for him. So he starts off the story very unhappy about being stuck like he feels like he's on a treadmill and that he just can't get out of this. And these are the kind of stories I like. But when I first started writing Silver Skies, it wasn't my intention to write a fantasy or science fiction book. I wanted to write something like Colleen McCullough's The Thornbirds, like what I like to read. But I ended up putting fantasy scenes in there. At the very beginning of the book, he goes into a coma and he meets Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ tells him, he says, you can have, Brianna will be yours, as long as you go to her without committing physical adultery. This is a married man you get. And as long as you learn the secret of her spirit. So right over there, right there, I'm telling you the rules of magic for this book. Okay? He's going to get the help of Jesus Christ, but he's got to meet certain conditions. And then Jesus ends the scene by saying, but please don't rely on me appearing to you all the time, because I cannot. Because if I show up, then Satan will show up and try to impersonate me, and it will cause you to go off your path. And then I end that scene. By the way, that end part was not in the Silver Skies that's published and out now. And when I'm finished with Silver Skies 1996 version, I'm going to take my old version of Silver Skies off the market because it's no good. It doesn't have an ending. But I'm going to leave it up until this one's finished, which will be about a year from now or so. So I'm working on Silver Skies, and I've resigned myself to the fact, hey, Gail, I know you're not a fantasy fan, but you have written a fantasy. You've got magic in there, okay? Even though, and you've put rules around it like a good fantasy writer, because a fantasy is not going to be worth reading if your main character is so powerful they can do anything and everything. I mean, where's the conflict? You already know he's going to win. So there's the rule. And then for the first 2/3 of the book, Jesus Christ never shows up anymore directly. But things happen, and you realize there's something supernatural going on in the background, but it's like a mystery. So I've got a mystery in here, I've got a character story, and I've got an event story. So I've got 3 of them working in this book. The mystery's going to get resolved pretty much about 2/3 of the way through because it's not primarily a mystery. The the character and event stories will be resolved towards the very end. That's because the event story is almost as important as the character story. And so anyways, I've resigned myself to the fact that it's actually magical realism, because I've been reading all these books about the craft of writing, and they're really helping me to shape the story in my mind, and I'm really fine-tuning it. I've got a detailed outline now that's about 30 pages long for the last 1/3 of the book, which I didn't write yet. And the last 1/3 is set in the tribulation period, where a lot of the magic's going to start appearing now. You see, basically, it was kind of in the back burner because I wanted to set the tone of the book and make it very realistic. The magic will be like SHIELD technology, but it's based on technology that's in my life right now, which a lot of people don't know about, or they think I'm crazy for believing in it. But because it's not mainstream knowledge, not reported on mainstream news, I'm going to make this book structure it like a fantasy. Now, when you write a fantasy, you got to make sure that the world knows what the magic is in the story and how it works and what its limitations are, which requires the author to know that magical world in and out. Well, I know it because I live it, but I got to understand that a lot of my readers don't live it, so I have to I have to reveal it to them in the story. So that's what I'm doing. This is going to be a really good book. You know, when I first started Silver Skies, my goal was to write something like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, a trilogy. But I wanted it, I knew it was going to be a fantasy, but I didn't want it to have the feel of a fantasy. And I didn't realize it, but I was actually writing very much like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's a magical realist author, a Nobel Prize winning writer. He died in 2014. And he was actually a very big fan of Silver Skies. When Steven Spielberg optioned Silver Skies in 2004, 2005, he read my superior version, the one that's going to be the basis of the book I'm working on now, the one that I wrote in the 1990s, and it was very good. And what's interesting is the 2 screenwriters that he hired to work on it were Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Orson Scott Card, and they're both fantasy writers. Orson Scott Card's also a science fiction writer. So that tells you right off the bat what kind of a story it is. It's science fiction fantasy. Or Steven Spielberg wouldn't have hired those 2. He says, how do you know those are the 2? That's what Vladimir Putin told me brain to brain, okay? Because I told Vladimir to give Spielberg the movie rights. So it's a fantasy. But it's magical realism, which is a subset of fantasy that has a tone of the real world in it. In other words, the voice and atmosphere of the story is very realistic. It's like I've got the background like something similar to the Oklahoma City bombing in the background, and so it's magical realism. So if you're a fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you'll probably love this. It's not really a Tolkien type of story. So I have created a page for you writers out there that want to know how I'm approaching this process. I'm rereading all of the books in my writing craft, in my craft about my writing, the books that I bought in the 1990s that helped me write Silver Skies. I rebought all of them and a couple others. And I'm rereading them to get my mind back to the way it was when I was working on Silver Skies in the 1990s, because I wrote a very good book. I mean, like I said, I picked that thing up and I couldn't put it down when I read it cold. But then I ruined it because I'd forgotten my writing skills, like I said in my past video. I've been debating whether I'm already starting to think about this, because I'm just about finished with How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy by Orson Scott Card. And it's making me realize, I told myself this book has got to end at the very end of the tribulation, when Jesus Christ defeats the Antichrist forces. How can you make it go? There's no conflict. I said, what kind of conflict would there be in the millennium? That would be the next stage. But I got to admit, when I originally conceived Silver Skies, I was thinking of making it like a huge trilogy, like Lord of the Rings, where I'd have one section in this present earth, another section in the tribulation, and another section in the millennium. But then I gave up on the idea of the millennium, thinking, you can't make a story about the millennium, but you know what? I might be able to if I structure it as a fantasy novel. The conflict I might get feedback from my readers. If you really, when I finish this book, if my readers really enjoy this and would like me to write a sequel, I might be able to bring Dor and Brianna back into the millennium. But the conflict would have to revolve around the battle at the end of the millennium, when Satan raises an army from, oh, you know what? I think I've got a story here. When Satan raises an army from Gog, which would be kind of like Russia. I don't know if it's going to be called Russia in the millennium, though. Maybe not. I'll work those details out later. I could structure the conflict around that. And the story question could be, how could anybody be unhappy with Jesus Christ as ruler of the world? And I could possibly come up with a very compelling story about that. I might be able to write a sequel. You guys might want to let me know when my book comes out, when I finish Silver Skies 1996 version. Let me know if you think I should write a sequel called Silver Skies: The Millennium. If so, this book's going to be about as long as The Lord of the Rings when I'm done. So I at first told myself, there's no way. I mean, how can you have conflict in the millennium? You've got the perfect ruler, but when you read the Bible, it is clear that there is a rebellion in the millennium towards the end. What I have to, if I did decide to write a book about the millennium, I would need to do tremendous research on what the world will be like in the millennium, though I pretty much already know. It's going to be fascinating. So I might make it out to be a story about the setting, where the people are transformed by living in the millennium, and they come out different people towards the very end, when the millennium is about to be replaced with the eternal state, which is going to be different. And see, in the millennium, I believe you still have the sun and the moon and all that, but when you go into the eternal state, there are no light. I mean, that all goes away. The Bible says the God is the light. So I might be able to make a good story about that. Anyways, it was time for me to make my video. Check the link that I have underneath this page that shows, for you writers out there that want to. I basically gave myself a Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing with all these books that I'm reading, and I'm going to be putting that back into my head. And I have created a page that critiques each of these books and how they're helping me with my current project. And you writers out there, there are not very many good books out there. I find most fiction a complete bore. I admit it. About the only one I like reading is Jane Austen and Emily Bronte and Colleen McCullough. Everybody else to me is a bore. So I'm trying to write something along that line, except it's going to be a fantasy. And I would love it if I could encourage other writers out there to write something great. Because we just have, what's going out there is so boring to me. I mean, I can't get into these characters. It's not like, I feel like everything Hollywood's turning out now is cardboard cutout characters. I just can't get into it.